We surveyed over 400 engineers and architects across North America to find out what separates the best firms from the rest. And we found three things, three C's. We're covering one on each of our podcasts, and today we're wrapping up with the third one. This is part 3 of a 3-part series based on the 2026 Future of Work in Engineering and Architecture report, produced by EMI and Actions Prove. Part 1 and 2 are already out. Confidence was covered on the AEC Leadership podcast. Clarity was covered on the AEC PM podcast, and there are links for both of them in the description. Today, we are closing out our 3-part Future of Work series, and I have to say, we've saved what I think is the most important conversation for last. We've talked about confidence, what happens when your team doesn't trust the direction your firm is headed. We've talked about clarity, what it costs when people can't see a future for themselves inside your organization. And we will link to these episodes for you. Today, we're talking about connection. And I mean at the CEO level, not team lunches, not retreats, not the surface level stuff. Real organizational connection, the kind that shows up in engagement data, retention numbers, and whether your best people feel like they belong here for the long haul. And to have this conversation, I've brought in someone who has been thinking about this alongside me for 6 years now. Peter Atherton is the president and founder of Actions Prove, a licensed professional engineer and the co-author of this report. He works with CEOs on exactly this stuff every single day. So you're going to get real answers here, not theoretical ones. Now, before I jump in with Peter, I do want to tell you about AEC PM Connect, a series of in-person events that we've created at EMI for AEC project managers and the leaders who develop them. If you want to stay on top of PM trends, elevate your team, and deliver stronger project results, these full-day events are built for you. You can learn more about the events and register at aecpmconnect.com. I'm your host, Anthony Pisano, and this is the Civil Engineering CEO Show. All right, now I'd like to welcome back again Peter Atherton. Peter is president and founder of Actions Prove. Worked with Peter a long time, and we've been working on this research, Peter, together for 6 years now. I can't believe it's that long already. Welcome back.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. Great to be back. And yeah, it's been a great 6 years really developing this independent research and seeing, through some pretty challenging and times of change and uncertainty, really getting insight on the data has been great for my practice and great to really help out and show some trends in the industry, which I'm excited to talk about more today.
Absolutely. And, every year, Pete, kind of the data teaches us something different. And what would you say surprised you most about this year's findings?
Well, it surprised me. Well, I guess it's a couple. One, how consistent some of the themes are, with how to attract, develop, and retain talent. Like that seems like a mystery, but it's really not. I mean, the data each year gets pretty clear. There's some things that change, but then, career advancement, that's a key aspect year after year after year. It's also interesting to see the things that have changed over time. This year really coming to a head, like the importance of leadership during the times of uncertainty and change, and how people are, the data is strongly suggesting, no more managing firms. Like that's important, but we need leadership today. And, leadership, if it's perceived as ineffective, is a reason people have said that they're leaving or they consider leaving. And when we flip the question this year, knowing that was a key consideration, we got what would get you to stay for the next 3 to 5 years? Well, if I had more confidence in my leadership team. And so that's something that really stood out this year. And then some of the AI, how it is being used and how that's changing in firms very quickly.
Yeah, so definitely interesting points there. I think the confidence in my leadership was a big one. And we definitely saw some big differences in the themes between kind of the less experienced professionals and, of course, the higher level leaderships of the companies. And that was pretty much something throughout that we saw in most of the topics, which was very interesting. And ultimately, what we're going to focus on today is, there were 3 things that we took out of the research this year that it was clear that kind of top AEC firms did differently, which was confidence, clarity, and connection. And this is the third part in a three-part series where we're covering each one of those. And today we will focus more on connection. But before we go there, I do want Pete to just give us your thoughts on those three. Like why those three? Why not five things? Why not 10 things? Why do you think those three things kind of stood out?
I mean, one, keep it simple, right? What is really working? Again, I see it in as a practitioner, as a former major firm owner, I see it working with my clients, and we see it in the data, right? It all aligns that if there is clarity, and then we started with clarity because if there really is clarity on the firm's direction, like what are we trying to accomplish in the marketplace? What is our mission? What is our vision? What do we value? How do we define winning? That clarity gives someone an opportunity to opt to connect into that. But the connection is very important. Like, once a firm declares what they're about, now I have a decision to make whether it aligns with me, whether I want to connect with that. And then as we move forward, like the confidence in continuing on, like, are we going to continue to take the action? So I think it's not how you do it in this different firm sizes, different inflection points, whether it be the size of firm, there's different things going on. So how you would do it might be a little different, but if we had those three things in place are highly correlated to very successful organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the connection data is really some of the most striking in the entire report. 77% of employees at top firms are highly engaged versus 27% at less competitive firms. So that's a 50-point gap. So, in your experience, Pete, you work with a lot of CEOs, a lot of management teams. What creates that gap? Is it culture? Is it strategy? Is it the ownership structure? Is it a little bit of everything? What do you think creates that gap?
Well, when we think about engagement, you have to, if we think in terms of a logic model, engagement's not an input, engagement's not an activity, but it is an output that we can then leverage for greater outcomes, growth and prosperity. So it's not something you can turn on. So what are some of the inputs? What are the activities that lead to someone being engaged is sort of the key. So you think a little bit systematically about that. The other lens to put on this is, the Gallup organization for 40 years has been doing workplace research across industries. And their self-stated number one most profound finding ever is that 70% of the variance of employee engagement is one's direct supervisor. So supervisors matter. I mean, that is, that is very important in organizations. And so if a manager supervisor is not engaged, well, they're not going to be able to engage their talent. And so that's a big element. But the piece that I think is very interesting today, and with the higher scrutiny on one side, but opportunity on the other side, is the other 30%. And that's the organization. Like, what is happening does the organization have clarity that I might leave my manager or I might be encouraged by my manager, but organizationally that other 30% say, assuming the 70% is holding, that's either creating headwinds or tailwinds for the organization. And I might like my supervisor, but what's my boss's boss like? And that's going to be an indication. And that gets into one of those other reasons that, my confidence in my leadership team. But then it was another reason people gave to stay they would be considering leaving for the right opportunity, but they might consider staying for the next 3 to 5 years if they had higher confidence in the firm's success. So that's that other 30%. So, 70% of the equation, one's direct supervisor. And in the data too, there's about a 50-point swing. So a direct correlation with rate your supervisor as effective in supporting your career growth. Where there was 77% highly engaged, that 74% said my supervisor is effective in supporting my career growth. On the other side of the spectrum, where there was 27% being highly engaged in less talent competitive firms, only 32% rated their supervisor at, strongly supporting their career growth. So I think you've got to look in the organization, supervisors matter, career advancement matter, not just training and development. Those are ingredients to career advancement, and a path is a key ingredient to career advancement. The supervisor plays a role, but organizationally, I find that if we think about it in terms of a system, CEOs and executive teams are better able to navigate that gap.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so important. It's just not talked about as much as some of the other things that you hear about, which is why we want to focus on connection more today, because you're right. That engagement is really what can make or break growth for your organization. And we're going to dive into connection a little bit deeper here. But, you
And
know,
just one thing to say, I mean,
yeah,
in for a couple of years now, that there's and it's because leaders have really increased based on the data. There's this dangerous disconnect we talked about in last year's report, which was 80%, 81% of those who identified as leaders reported that they were highly engaged, which is a phenomenal thing. Like 81% of leaders are highly engaged. But it was like drop off was half. Last year, 40% of managers said they were highly engaged, 39% of technical professionals, and it went up a little bit this year, but there was still a dramatic drop from 81% of leaders to maybe, 40% and 48% of managers and technical folks. And it's going to be hard to close that gap unless the leaders are understanding that the world outside of leaders is just different and something's not working. And so really disrupting the culture that works for leaders to be a culture that really works for managers and technical professionals is takes a different type of leader to do that. And this is not watering down standards, because I mean, in our data, what would get you to stay with your current employer for the next 3 to 5 months if you're considering leaving? Holding people accountable, addressing ineffective managers, addressing ineffective, poor performing employees. That was right there. And so really the desire for high performance is really important. And that's partly changing the culture. And because a lot of times they'll change the culture a little bit, watering down standards. That's not what's attracting top talent today. It's actually ratcheting up the standards is what I find. And the data was suggesting that as well.
yeah, I always love the opportunity to kind of pick Pete's brain on this stuff, because not only have our companies teamed up for 6 years to do the research, but he was a partner in a firm at one point in his career. But since then, he's just been working with firms on this stuff. And last time he was on the show, he was taking us through his book, Next Level Leadership. So he's really dug into leadership teams and growth and engagement. And that's why we're really going to dig into connection today. So let's dig a little deeper into connection, because I think this is a word that tends to get misused a lot. When CEOs hear connection, they tend to think about team building events, right, or office culture perks. But but in your opinion, what does kind of real connection look like? And I know you gave us a little overview there, but when you think about at the organizational level, right, the kind of connection that can really move the needle when it comes to engagement or retention, like how would we see that visibly?
So there's a couple of frameworks that I have in Next Level Leadership that I'll just kind of walk through. I mean, one of them, I call it the new work covenant. And so the connection begins with sort of the one of the tenets is meaningful work, right? So you're doing something and I find it meaningful work. And that sort of declaring what our direction is as an organization is, I'm going to decide whether that's meaningful. The second component is genuine and work productive relationships. That's going to be key. So I'm on meaningful work. That's going to help drive my engagement. But I have, genuine and work productive relationships. And that's not just like, hey, we're friends. Hey, we do some team activities. That's great. But it's work productive. And that's not mentorship. That's really coaching that I see. You're helping me get better, because then it gets into the third element, which is we're talking about the transaction that must happen, what the expectations are for work, the budget, the schedule, I'm going to need you to work a little bit more, or that wasn't good enough. Is that really your best work? Is that legendary work you're doing here? No, let me help you with that. And I'm not going to do it for you, but I'm going to coach you through, because we can talk about the transaction, why we need to make money, why that's important. Why? Because everyone wants to get paid every 2 weeks. We need to invest in some new technology. And then it sort of gets into, am I having growth? Am I making an impact? So that's going to be, and then we want to sometimes just, hey, the work we do is meaningful. We don't always talk about it as meaningful as it's, and then we want to jump to the transaction piece. If we don't have that relationship in place, and again, the caring is key, but I'm helping you progress, and coaching is a major differentiator I see across high performing organizations. We're not just mentoring, we're laying on, and we're putting on a layer of accountability, which is the coaching piece. right? I need you to get better, and you're expecting me to help you get better. So there's a coach someone willing to coach, someone willing to be coachable. If that doesn't happen, we're not going to really get that strong connection as it relates to what people want career advancement. The other lens that I like folks to look through, and if we look back through our careers, it makes a difference, is meaningful. What work is meaningful to us and how that aligns with us is different through different work seasons, is different through different life seasons. And so, back in the book, Reversing Burnout, I talked about these different seasons. I talked about, again, in Next Level Leadership, but, the early in our career, we want to master our craft, right? So we're connected by learning the trade. And then we sort of shift into, after about a decade, into making a name for ourselves. And so what connects us is to make a name. And then halfway through, we shift into making a difference and then leaving a legacy. And, that's sometimes they're complementary. If we're more single, when we're trying to, master our craft, we can put in some time. But sometimes when we're trying to make our name, maybe we're in a family situation. So our life season changed. And so flexibility at work is important. So, the connection is always individual. The connection is often, associated with work season and life season. But the connection happens through relationship and really trying to help somebody advance. And that's going to be, maybe not everyone wants to advance, but your A players certainly do. And so really trying to make that connection and understanding what's motivating people, because it is just different in different life circumstances, different work circumstances. Maybe something's changing on the team. And the one thing I'll say is interesting in that, as we've done this survey over the years, really thinking about, and I know we've spoken about this, and maybe the bias of the survey, and that every survey has some bias. And in kind of really thinking through ours, a 7-minute survey, we keep, good counsel to say, make it 3 or 4 minutes and more people will respond, right? Not we're statistically relevant and then some. But we want to find out more information, right? To really uncover not just what, but why. And so individuals take this survey, they spend 7 or 8 minutes, and all they get is a PDF of the report. It's probably not, our middlers or our low achievers. It's probably the high achievers that take this survey. And so in my mind, when I'm working with organizations talking about this is what the data says. How does your firm apply? How does this look like in your organization? What would we do? It might reflect what your high achievers are saying, what your A players are saying. And so again, maybe if we took this and it was fully represented, the answers might be different. But me as an organizational, strategic firm advancement consultant, as an organizational development consultant, you kind of want to know what your A players are saying and build the organization for them, because then the B players come along and other people might opt out. But you really don't want to design your organization for the middle. That's just not ultimately healthy for business. So, but the connection, it's individual. And, so I'll pause there to see if maybe there's another angle that you want to take on that. But, taking the time to really understand is ultimately, because someone is going to decide whether they're connected or not, right? It's not what me as the leader says, you should be connected. Well, they're going to decide if they're feeling connected, right? We're going to give them some clarity. They're going to make the decision whether it's enough to connect them, right? And am I saying the right things? And if we build a productive enough relationship, I can push back on some things. They can push back on some things, and we build a tighter relationship. But it's going to be key. And there's a little bit of humility, and you'll have strong connection. Well, they're deciding if they're connected or not. So what am I doing? And the last thing I'll say, kind of an interesting frame. I do a lot of work where I've gotten a lot of discussions with firms about, we want to be a firm of choice. And I say, okay, do you want to be a firm of choice, or do you want to be the firm of choice? Right? Because it makes a difference. You have to be the consultant of choice in the marketplace and the employer of choice in the workplace. And, that means like someone has to choose you. So if we want to be the employer of choice, what are we doing to be choice worthy? Right. And you can break that down, but someone else is choosing us. And upfront, it's maybe on faith, great interviews. But then every year, every quarter, they're deciding to re-choose you. So from an organizational perspective, what are we continuously doing to be choice worthy of the best talent who has higher agency and more choices?
Yeah, kind of a lot there to unpack. But what I will say as a follow up to that, to dig a little bit deeper, because you made some really good points there. The data shows us, and you alluded to this earlier, that technical staff feel far less connected, right, than the leaders, right? One of those rifts that we talked about. 22% of technical staff say that they feel like a quote unquote a resource to bill hours, right? Not necessarily a person with a future in that organization. So going back to some of the things you just said, if I'm a CEO of a company, how do I even know that those thoughts are happening in my own firm, right? And then if I do find that out, how can I start to repair that? I mean, you talked a little about the relationships, the transparency, right? I think part of it is being aware of these feelings in our organization. And the second step is then what do we do when we find out?
I mean, that's, I think, the value of this independent data set is that this is what the data is saying in our profession. And the question is that reflective of your organization? So if there's a disconnect between leadership and management and technical folks, the leaders theoretically have the most influence on whether the managers are going to be highly engaged, and the managers will have the most influence on whether the technical professionals will be engaged. Right. So say that's 70% of that equation, but 70% of the manager's equation is the leadership. So I think it's, do your own checking. One of the strategies, it depends on the size of the organization, but if you know who your top performers are, I mean, you can have lunch with them. You can talk about things. But really, the active CEO is very important to organizations. And I see that a lot in organizations. I talked about this in Next Level Leadership, and it's, active and effective verbs, like not just nouns. Like I'm not just a noun leader. I'm sort of a verb and really actively involved with the organization, putting the right pressure in the system. The idea is to find out and talk. And the one really nice thing about our profession is if something is going awry, it's usually because someone's just busy and consumed and just don't know about it. Right. But once you identify the issue and you help coach someone and you give them some space to do so, a lot of these situations get rectified, or they have the potential to get rectified. But I think if there is not engagement in the system, I mean, that's a cultural thing. It's a structural thing. If it's not the leader, then who's going to solve that? Right. And so I think it is part of the duty of the senior leadership team to make sure culture is right and that the culture is engaging people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is on leadership to know that people feel this way. I mean, obviously the reason we started this survey 6 years ago was because we always like to say that we ask the questions that you don't want to ask your employees, right? And this would be one of those questions. So I think to Pete's point, at least from this research that it is a problem throughout the industry. Now you just need to figure out if it's a problem within your walls. And one of the things that I would say to take a look at in the report, which of course we'll link to in this episode, is we do kind of a breakdown of what are those talent friendly, top AEC firms. And then we give a middle tier and we give a lower tier. And you can kind of see where your company stacks up with those three, because maybe if you're in that kind of talent first, top notch firm, maybe there's less of the chance that those things are happening. Could be one benchmark. And of course, having conversations with people, right? The relationships, the transparency that Pete has talked about for, really a lot of today are things that can help you identify that. Because I agree that an active CEO getting involved and engaged with these things, it can often be the difference as to how positive that culture is in an organization. And that's why we're trying to get some of these things on your radar through this research and of course through this podcast series that we've been doing. And one more thing I want to dive into along these same lines, Pete, is something that I know that you're passionate in thinking and talking about, which is burnout. Transform your technical experts into impactful leaders with EMI's Engineering Leadership Accelerator. Tailored for AEC professionals, this program enhances communication, delegation, and decision-making skills. Flexible, interactive, and designed to fit your team's schedule. Elevate your team's leadership capabilities today. Visit engineeringmanagementinstitute.org and click on corporate training. You had your first book, Reverse Burnout, I think back in 2017. And, Burnout with this survey has been an up and down a little bit, but this year it's back, right? It's back up this year, 71% up from 64% in 2025. And it seems to be hitting technical staff and managers the hardest, right? Actually, twice the rate of leaders. Again, another one of the less experienced versus the experienced rift that we've seen in this research. And so, is burnout a connection problem at its core? And what again, if we go back to the CEO and the leadership, what is their role in addressing this issue?
Well, I mean, so when I wrote Reversing Burnout back in 2017, in what I, talking to, different professionals in our space and leaders, it was overwork. It was the superhero hamster wheel. It was a lot of, just overwork for decades. And there's a whole, kind of with the advent of technology in the early 90s, and, engineers used to do engineering, and then you had designers, and then the engineers were doing designing, and then that we had doer sellers and doer seller leaders. And so it was just this, you kind of had a triplex 4-part role, and you had the Great Recession, and we weren't hiring young people. And so you had these superheroes develop, and then we didn't know how to, you started hiring people back again. And you just had this element that was happening in the teams, but it was a lot of overwork with lack of teams and just people doing things like the superhero syndrome. That still exists because there's people with 30 years experience that's all they know. All they know is doing it all themselves. And it takes a little bit to unwind that and learn how to build teams and delegate, but you can't just abdicate. I mean, so that's our senior folks. In the newer folks who didn't grow up in that, the 30 years of more for less, have been around the last, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. I see burnout when I get the calls on it. It's a little different. It's about a lack of alignment, and that sort of grates people faster. I think back in, a lot of us maybe more senior came in the industry in the 90s recession, went through the dot-com recession, went through the Great Recession. We're kind of lucky to have a job, right? So alignment, what work was work, and we were, that was just it. Now there's more alignment, there's personal agency. So if there's a lack of alignment and lack of energy from work, I see that causing frustration and burnout, right? And I think at the same time, there's more scrutiny on the leadership, and we see this in the data that, hey, you hear this in different words of saying, if we continue to be overloaded and we're not solving that problem, either you don't see it or you don't care, upper leadership, and either case is not good for me. Or we have underperforming employees, we have underperforming managers, and there's some version, this is pretty stark, of either you're blind to it or you have no spine to address it. Either way, it's not there. And so that type of stuff is causing frustration. And that, I think some of that is leaning into burnout. But it's definitely spiked. And again, and my theory on that, in looking at the data and really kind of reflecting, is it was pretty high in COVID, and then it did go down, as you mentioned, and now it's back again. And part of my working theory on this, and we'll have another year of data to kind of see, and I'm talking more, doing a little bit more research into this, because I do want to have a second edition of that book, is the external factors play a role in our profession that I think a lot of us realize. This is public health, safety, welfare. There's big sprints until we have to, finish a project, and we're stamping it. And there is some stress, right, with deadline stress and the nature of our work. And generally we can handle it. But when there's an external stress on top of that, it's 5 years ago, COVID, now AI and advanced technology, that I think really starts driving some of the extra burnout. And that's a working theory I have. And so again, how do we provide, if we can provide clarity as an organization and clarity in what someone's opportunity is, that's going to help with the alignment piece. And if we're really connecting with people, the energy can be positive. In a stressful world, we can say, well, that's stress, but that's really on the project side. That's really on the client side. That's not on the organization side. So I'm not going to be upset with the organization. We'll try to solve some of those other things, or know that we can't control this, but we can control that. I think having some agency at burnout is a big deal. And so if people feel like they're in control, leader burnout is different than manager and technical professional burnout because leaders typically have more control of their day, what they say yes to, what they say no to, and managers and technical professionals have been dealt their cards and they just need to play them. So that can cause a little bit more frustration and burnout, feelings of burnout at that level.
Yeah, absolutely. And the analogy I like to use to drive home kind of everything you just said is if your employee, let's say, is in a canoe on a lake and they're in a fog and they can't see where they're going, you just tell them, keep rowing, keep rowing, keep rowing. I mean, people are going to get burnt out because they may be happy to do the work, but they don't know where they're headed. They can't see things, right? They're just kind of being pushed in this direction. But if it's clear and they see the goal and they see the other side, and then you're asking them they'll row hard, right? They'll work hard. Like you're saying, that's the project side of it. Like they have no problem doing the work, but it's when they have that lack of clarity on their career path, right? How are we going to use AI? How are we going to differentiate our company? How are we reinvesting our people? And bringing that clarity to the table will actually make people, I think, want to work harder and still not burn out because they're just, like you said, they're much more in alignment with things and they kind of feel like they know where they're headed. And so I definitely think that word alignment that you used is a good one to make sure people are we're all headed in the same direction and we know where that direction is, which is really
Right.
important.
And if you can layer in great team design and team success and high functioning, high performing teams, knowing that they're not alone, but they have an important role. If they don't do this thing on the job, then it doesn't get done, but you can get help for it. And that really helps because people don't feel like they're alone. But that takes a new muscle in a lot of organizations to really build high performing teams.
Absolutely. All right. So we're coming to the culmination of this kind of 3-episode series. We talked about clarity. We talked about confidence. Today, Peter and I talked about connection. These are the 3 things that we really recognize that AEC organizations that are very successful have been doing. That's what the research has showed us, and the research that we've done in the future of work research. So the last question I'll have for you to kind of wrap this up and put a bow on it, Pete. You work with a lot of, again, CEOs and management teams. What do you wish more CEOs and high level leaders understood about their people based on the research, based on your interaction with them over the years?
Yeah, that they want to be led. Right. I mean, ultimately we as a
Right.
society are craving leadership. And there's this
Yes.
sort of manage your people. Well, no one wants to be or we have a client manager. No client wants to be managed. They do want to be served. Right. And no employee, well, I really want to be managed. No, I want to be led. Right. We manage projects, we manage processes, but we lead people. And so really that is from an organizational, that's a human perspective. And to be part of the team, you as a leader, executive leader, you have a role and function on this team. And as managers, you have roles and functions on this broader team. And as technical professionals, you have roles and functions on this team. So that is key. How we function as a team, educating on how we function as a team, I think is really important that we sort of miss that. And the other, just in this era where, we've been doing this for 6 years and, after the shock of COVID, we've been getting the data coming through the COVID change and uncertainty. And now the change and uncertainty with AI and advanced technology, I mean, those are times not to manage the organization. Our future will not be an extension of our past. Where for many years we just, leadership is management, right? And management is absolutely important, but I think people are craving leadership personally, but then demanding it for their organization, which is, higher confidence in my leadership team. I will stay if I see that. Higher confidence in the firm's ability to succeed. Are we understanding that this is a time of change and uncertainty? Who's stepping up? And again, the operations are very important. And last thing I'll say, there is organizational health. That is very important. Operationals, right? Our big operation management hat. Resilience as an organization is very important. In my work with organizations saying, yeah, being healthy, being resilient is great. We need to be fit. Right. That's how we build our capabilities. That's how we go on offense. That's how we deal with business and practice model evolution, things that we haven't had to think about the business model for almost all of our careers. We haven't had to really think about the practice model. Well, we have to think about it now. And that's going to be, really important information. And I think if you knew what gave your people angst, it it's along the lines of uncertainty, instability. And that's, some of the data on ownership models. I think, there's inherent instability in some models and there's inherent stability in other models. And I think that's making a difference. And so really getting to answer your question, really step into the verb form of leadership and lead the people is I see as a difference maker.
Absolutely. I think that's a great way to kind of sum up everything that we've kind of heard this year in the research is people want to be led, right? That keeps coming through in so many different ways. And it's something that we as leaders need to focus on and need to figure out ways not just for ourselves to lead, but to build leaders in our organization. And a lot of the stuff that shows up in the research dictates that, and we'll show you how to do it or give you some tips on how to start integrating some of these things into what you do. And at the end of the day, clarity, confidence, and connection. If your company is getting better at those things, you're going to have more success long term to grow a sustainable organization. So once again, big thanks to Peter Atherton from Actions Prove. Again, check out Next Level Leadership. Actually, we have a separate episode with Peter on that we can link to. He's also has his book, Reversing Burnout. Great stuff. And I know he's working on another one. He's always working on a book every time you talk to him. So I know he's working on another one. I don't even have to ask him. But Pete, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. As usual, it's been a pleasure to do the research with you. I think it continues to show us very interesting trends in the industry. And our hope in that sharing it with all of you is it can help you to plan accordingly with your organizations going forward. So thanks again, Pete. It's always a pleasure to chat about this stuff.
You're very welcome. Appreciate the invite and be able to talk with you as always.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Peter. If you missed parts 1 and 2 of this series, Confidence on the AEC Leadership Podcast and Clarity on the AEC PM Podcast, please go back and check those out. The links are provided for you in the description of this show. And if there's one thing I want you to walk away with from all 3 of these episodes, it's this. The gap between the best AEC firms and the rest isn't accidental. It's built deliberately, consistently, one leadership decision at a time. Confidence, clarity, and connection. 3 things, and all of them are within reach. The full 2026 Future of Work in Engineering and Architecture report is available for free. Everything we've covered across all 3 episodes, plus a lot more. Download it at the link in the description. Again, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Pete. Please subscribe to our channel here. We do put out videos like this on a weekly basis to help AEC professionals become better managers and leaders. And I'll see you next week.